Hi everyone, good morning. We're here to talk about the second book in the Joshua Stakeout series. Spent some of the day reading this yesterday. Joshua Stakeout episode 2, and it's pretty good. A lot of action in it, but for the most part, it's still um, centered around um, a lot of the stories we talked about, mythologies, whatever you call it. But the facts are that this story here is very inspired by today's events in the world and a lot of other things going on. But for for me overall, just writing it, I had a lot of fun writing it. So you can see the premise is the evil No Wise hatches a plan to take over the world, while a preacher with supernatural powers named Joshua Lark was trying to stop him and his evil society called the Sons of the Serpent from achieving world domination. He befriends an assassin, a reformed witch, a high school student who wields the power of electricity, son of an aristocrat, and his long lost sister. Join him and his stakeout team in their fight against the forces of darkness. So that's the premise here. Um, so that was Cynthia, Sword Guy, Electro Boy, um, and Rebecca, and Eli, also known as Night Knight. You see, yeah, that's pretty much all I can say. And Nicole, I forgot Nicole is the sister's name. So those were the characters in the story, and then it's just from there it's just a non-stop action ride because um overall this is the non-spoiler part. So uh, not spoil anything. A lot of the characters in the you know the story we're talking about um Aaron Joshua Stakeout. It's Team Joshua Stakeout. That's why the stakeout is the name. The Avengers, da 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 da, Defenders, Joshua Stakeout. So, um, as the story is going along, we're seeing how the characters are developing. We're seeing the relationships between all of the characters. We're seeing good characters turn into bad characters turn into good characters, or it's just role reversals. A lot of people are changing within the story. They're developing the desire to want to help their community and change their ways because a lot of them are really not good characters, not perfect characters. But what you're seeing is they're very flawed characters, extremely flawed. They all have their own identities in the world, but it's changing after a while. We're seeing a lot of people looking in the beginning of or the end of the first book is taking you to the beginning of the second book. And that's something where the conflict between a lot of the characters is what's really this is centered upon. So you have a lot of good set pieces between Cynthia and Rebecca, and then some with Joshua Lark and No Wise, and other scenes with a lot of the other team is a lot of other things, fight scenes that are pretty cool. And then yeah, it's somewhere you go traveling inside Joshua's mind again, like the first book, but it's much more brief than the last book. It's just more focused on the current events between No Wise and Joshua Lark, and a group called the Sons of the Serpent is the evil people's group, and then, well, relative to the story, and then the Joshua Stakeout team is that's the other um, team for the good guys of the story. So overall, what you have is you have a brawl pretty much every other chapter. You might have very little slowing down, and just trying to put that character development in there. So that's um, how it is. So we're introduced to pretty much all of the villains of the Sons of the Serpent, and then all of the heroes to Joshua Stakeout. So that's the team, and they're basically fighting nonstop. Some cases, one scene leads to another, leads to another. We might have one time where the fight is leading between a team, the Sons of the Serpent between Joshua Stakeout, and then you You have another scene between Joshua and No Eyes, or you go into the end fight, you'd have pretty much everybody battling each other. So those are those things where it's just packing as much action as possible. So if you want to just like read nonstop action, you can even start. I recommend you can start with this book. You'd be a little bit confused, but you don't have to start with the first book before morning, of course. There's no sermons in this one, but I mean this is the nonstop action book, so that's why I wrote it for. And in this one, the trim is very small, things like that. But I think it's a lot less pages than the first book. I think 40 less pages or so. And I think it's to get you ready for the third book because it leaves you on a cliffhanger, and it gets you ready for the third book, Joshua's Takeout Simulation. So there's another title for this. I don't think the title reached this book, the paperback version, but an ebook is saying First Mission. So this is sort of series really starts with this book, but the one before that again is a prequel to the whole series. So it's all written in chronological order, but it can be read. Uh, in fact, what's crazy is you can read all the books in reverse, and then you would I think you would be confused with the third book. But if you start with the second book, you can go back to the first book and read the third book, or you can read the first book, second book, third book, and in some cases the third book, first book, second book. But in most cases, it's great if you're reading 1, 2, 3. That way you get there faster, because the first book is somewhat of a tough read, somewhat of a slog, because not that there's not a lot of action. There is some action, but there isn't as much action as the rest of the series. And for the first book, I want to also say that it's more, because it's the spiritual base like we've been talking about, but it's like it's intense. There's a lot of, it's more heavier to read than a lot of the other books, like the second and the third book. So that's the premise there. So, yep, that's the end of the spoiler-free review. Now this spoil the whole thing after 10 seconds. I'll wait. All right, how y'all doing today? Okay. And 7:40. Okay. We're getting started with where we left off with the first book, with Cynthia and Rebecca riding off their elemental dragons. So Ed is on, I believe Cynthia's dragon. And so as they're flying over a beach area or so, a place with a lot of water, we're seeing how this leads into a fight between Cynthia and Rebecca, because Cynthia's having a change of heart about this whole thing. They just left Joshua Lark at a town. Basically they flushed him out. With Cynthia and Rebecca's powers, they've defeated Joshua Lark, and they've left him, defeated. So we're picking up at that scene where we have Cynthia and Rebecca flying away, and then this is probably about 5 minutes after they left the town, and then you look at 15 minutes or so, and then we're getting into Cynthia and Rebecca's fight, and they start fighting each other because we're seeing that Cynthia actually now wants to go back in some cases, tell Joshua Lark she's sorry, how she feels and things like that. For the most part, No Eyes isn't having it, and so he forces his two daughters to fight each other. And Rebecca, believe it or not, she holds her own. Even so, with the water near Cynthia, I mean, Cynthia's pretty much in full control because she has the ocean. Uh, and Rebecca, she has the fire, but again, you're looking at how the fire is sort of weaker to the water in these types of places. And in most cases with water, you can really douse it out. You can really douse the fire out with the water. So that's why Rebecca is as sort of as a power. She's the younger sister to Cynthia, so that's the relationship there. But they're also like half sisters, so they have the same father but a different mother. Uh, part of a group called Sinister Sisters, which was also part of the Sons of the Serpent. Um, and is that a team is forming. We looked at Erlene, Windra, Cynthia, and Rebecca. Those four sisters. Again, they're all the daughters of Ed, also known as No Eyes. So after the scene, Rebecca has somehow defeated Cynthia. I believe it was sort of a emotional thing. It's something that I don't think Cynthia wanted to either go kill Rebecca, or she'd rather be left for dead instead of to join No Eyes and Rebecca at this point, because she doesn't want to go down that evil path. So what those two are doing now, we're looking how they're forming the Sons of the Serpent team. But before that, we're introduced in chapter, I believe it near the end of chapter 1, sort of towards chapter 2, is the fact that we're introduced to the new formed Joshua Stakeout building, Joshua Stakeout team, which is consisting of basically the guys with no powers. Mitchell, who's in a wheelchair. We have Ethan. We have Hector. We have Bennett. So it's really right now, and Joshua Lark. So those are the people who are basically just doing research now. So Joshua is a little bit concerned about the team that he's hearing about. He's hearing about the team formed called the Sons of the Serpent. So it's No Wise's group. So at the same time, Joshua is thinking, how can I find a powerful team of my own that can combat the Sons of the Serpent? Make like a superpower division. So he gets these ideas to invite some superheroes over, which they won't really get the invitation till a lot later in the story, maybe even toward the middle. But it leads to a ring on his doorbell, and he gets a ring by his long lost sister Nicole. See, as Joshua Lark is adopted, um, he didn't know he really had a sister until she rang on the doorbell. So Nicole is ringing on the doorbell and says, "I'm your sister." Da 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 da. Like, I love it. I do that. So those are the things that we're saying. More relationships, brothers and sisters, father and daughters, mother and daughters, cousins. I mean, there's a lot of relationships within the story. So the fundamental part of the story going forward is families and relationships. How these families are being torn apart by their differences in the world, and also the differences between their identities, and in some cases also what certain systems allow people to do, uh, sort of the abuse of the system. If you have mad scientists in the story, a character called Dr. Nefarious. You have a lot of other people. You even have evil music producers. You have XYZ. You have a lot of other uh, leaders in industries where they have taken a bad path. You have evil politicians. It's like, I would use the word evil again selectively, but within the confines of the story, there were people who've abused their power and had turned into the darkness because it was more of a convenient thing, and they more hidden in the shadows. And this is part of the Sons of the Serpent team against the Joshua Stakeout team. And of course, the fight is is riddled through all the pages, but where the lines are blurred again is who's on the good team. You have Cynthia again, who's the reformed witch. She's a girl, gave up the witchcraft stuff, but for the most part, even assassins. You have Sword Guy. His name is also um, Sword Guy. His name is also Alex. And there's another, just caveat is the fact that you have aristocrats. You have people who have sort of had a history of um, not fighting injustice. I mean, these are the people who had probably done more for themselves in a way that they had done things that were not necessarily for their community. So it's sort of one of those things where, as the story goes along, you find that the characters are infused in the story. They're infused in protecting each other for Joshua Stakeout team, because again, a lot of these people, they're not used to working together, not used to working in teams, they're used to helping themselves out. But as the story goes along, they're finding that this is their family. In a way, they're seeing, as the story's going by, that they can be, as a team, they can work as a unit. They'll still struggle to start fights, but that's the story that gets them at least to survive. So as the story's going along, we're seeing introduced by the assassin sword guy. So uh, he's he ends up trying to capture, not kill, but capture Joshua Lark because No Wise had hired Sword Guy again to abduct him, Joshua Lark, and then take him to the hideout, the Sons of the Serpent hideout. So um, as Joshua again is fighting Sword Guy, they're just bantering back and forth. They're sort of developing a rapport. They're understanding a little bit more about why each other is fighting. They're understanding each other's powers. As in the first time meeting, and then over time they develop a respect because they start fighting at least 3-4 times in the story. I would go maybe twice in the story, but the fights between Sword Guy and Joshua Lark are a mixture between the playful until the serious fight. Um, but overall, it doesn't necessarily lead to neither of them getting seriously hurt, but they do get some sustain some injuries. Um, so the second fight between Sword Guy and Joshua is Electro Boy. Electro Boy ends up shooting electricity at Sword Guy when Sword Guy gains the upper hand and apparently decides that he might have to kill Joshua Lark in order to at least take his body to the Noah's hideout. So overall, what we find is after Electro Boy incapacitated Sword Guy is the fact that we're learning that Joshua has now devised sort of a team. He had invited Sword Guy over. He had said about his plans to form a superhero team. So Electro Boy is basically a teenager. He's likened to like Spider-Man type character, but he wields the powers of electricity, and that is very advantageous as well to him because you know things like that. If you're moving at the speed of lightning, you're moving through the clouds. You can zip zap to the clouds, things like that. That's great power to have. That's why I call him Electro Boy, but he's also pretty young. I think in the story he's around 16 or so, and yeah, he's the young one in the group, but he's still probably the most powerful because he was an already established superhero at the time of episode 1. So now we're going into the story where we're seeing again the evil villains. I keep saying it, but the villains are formed again. You have Doctor Nefarious, you have Hollister Roland, you have a lot of other things. Again, so even the same, the demon that attacked the church in the first book is the same one in the second book now. So the same demon that killed Joshua Lark's mother is still alive at the time of episode 2, and also they end up fighting later on in the story, Joshua Lark and the demon that killed Joshua Lark's mother. Also, there's a werewolf. There's a few other things in there, but this is a No Wise's team. Yeah, the Doctor Nefarious person, basically a name like Doctor Nefarious, you would expect, of course, Nefarious Doctor who's just into evil experimentations. It's experimenting on people's animals and things like that. It's sort of like without their permission. So it's like those are the types of things that people have done in history. They've done some sort of experiments that have affected communities and things like that. So it's sort of the negative effects on your communities. Now again, there's both sides of the team. You have the Sinister Sisters, which means Rebecca is also on No Wise's team as of now, as well as Cynthia, who was on No Wise's team, not anymore. And then again, Arlene and Windra. So Rebecca has controlled the fire, Cynthia controls the water, Arlene controls the earth, and Windra controls the air. So that's the elements there. Um, you also have on the team a being named Damien. Damien was introduced in the first book. He's another powerful character that we don't really get to see his powers till maybe the third book. Honestly, I mean, the third book you really get to see what Damien is capable of, and then in the fourth book you really do get to see what Damien is capable of. We'll try to get the fourth book out by next month. Uh, then you're looking at a lot of these characters again. They're very, I don't want to just say flawed because then it's more about their intentions, or they're ruthless, they're killers and things like that. But also at the same time, they're less of a unit in the story. They're more individuals who have been brought together into form a team of people who can take down the world, basically. So that's the contrast between the Sons of the Serpent. Joshua Stakeout is more, Joshua Stakeout would be more about the unity and the sacrifice to form a family tie or bond, and whereas the Sons of the Serpent is more about the individuals taking over the world in their respective domains. So even in the politics, I think there's a politician there, um, Eli's father. So the one of the good guys' father, Eli, also known as a superhero called Night Knight. He's a hybrid of Iron Man and Batman, is being called Night Knight. So the first Knight is like the one that starts with an N, and the second one is the one that starts with a K. So Night Knight. He's the Knight, like the Dark Knight, but it's the first one where you say night, you at the night, and then the knight with armor, and then that's the one we mean night night. So it's a double entendre. So again, the superhero also Eli, his father Frederick is sort of a the millionaire who was sort of like also a corrupt politician as well. So there's that overlay, and then there's Trevor Yair, the producer, makes music that sends these frequencies and can control the world in a way with these instruments. Uh, so yeah, there's a lot of other things, but these characters in the story again are just even representations of society itself. But even for the story, not to judge them, because it's more of what their motivations are about, and that's what leads to these conflicts in the future. So as the story is going along, always is explaining how you take over the world, or at least how to defeat Joshua, because that's what he's more focused on in the first part of the story. And then leading to the second half, we're seeing how Joshua and Sword Guy are they're saying, what are we gonna do? Because Sword Guy is looking at it like, I respect you now. We just fought each other twice. I feel like you don't really deserve to get kidnapped or get killed, so I might as well just go to the hideout empty-handed. But you're seeing Joshua Lark is offering himself to really go there. Uh, they're sort of bonding in this sense, and those two end up actually driving. Uh, I believe, and then with also the couple of the people. I believe it was Bennett and Mitchell, but they end up going to Noise's hideout, and those two end up having to fight their way out because they realize, those two by themselves, Sword Guy and Joshua, can literally take out most of the Sons of the Serpent. So they end up actually fighting when they get there at the hideout. But to, to sort of elaborate, they're not strong enough to defeat all of the Sons of the Serpent. So Sword Guy and Joshua Lark end up losing. Uh, Joshua Lark ends up getting captured, and Sword Guy, he ends up being able to escape, just like clinging on to life, and that's what leads to the next fights. It was just the next fight. We go inside Joshua Lark's head. Well, even before that, we have the attack with the werewolf, and then they actually end up fighting at the stakeout building. With you really showcase what Nicole gets to do, Electro Boy, Eli, Cynthia. She even comes back. Cynthia's even come back as well. She came back first before Joshua Lark left. Before he left the Joshua Stakeout building to go to Noise's hideout. But the thing is, once Cynthia came around, he still thought she was trying to trick him. So what he did, he just rejected her, let her leave, and then she wasn't able to join the team until he got abducted. So it's sort of like after Joshua Lark gets abducted, that's when the Joshua Stakeout team really does form, and you get to see their stories Um, that's when it gets really fun because as Electro Boy's leading the charge, um, Sword Guy he rejoins them. He explains what happened. Nicole is there, Cynthia's there, and yeah, Eli is there. So that's when they're really forming a team. But overall, Werewolf attacks, and then they end up having a great fight scene, and then they end up defeating them because Electro Boy and Nicole basically just take over because they're getting being slung around like rag dolls. But like uh, Nicole's powers are super strength, and yeah, she basically knows kung fu, so that's another thing. Uh, for the most part, after that fight, you get to the hideout again, and you go inside Joshua Lark's mind. You find Shadow and Higher Self, and they end up getting into a 3-on-1 fight scene against Snow Eyes inside of his head. They get into a fight, and Joshua gains the upper hand basically. He even brings out Aragon the Lion from the first story, and then they end up defeating No Eyes. So getting to a point where No Eyes really thought he had him because he got inside his head, but Joshua like ended up defeating No Eyes. Even if he was in his head, he still had a great protection over him. Joshua Lark did. So that protection, again, that fight that they had fought, it was just a proving of the mental toughness that Joshua Lark had developed. So getting past these points now, meeting in the middle. So we're seeing how Dr. Nefarious had actually created a clone. He created actually several clones. Or they call them humanoid robots, I believe, humanoid androids or whatever. Those are the things that ended up nearly killing Sword Guy at the hideout in the first fight. But now he had formed a physical copy of himself, and it ended up riding back in the car with, I believe, Sword Guy and a few other people in the car as well. I believe Hector or someone. But those people in the car now have to deal with a robot with laser beam eyes. So the robot ends up blasting the car apart, and then they have to try to rescue each other in these scenes. I won't spoil too much of that y'all read on, but yeah, a lot of action leads to a lot of action, and then basically a forest fire starts because the cars exploded, things are going everywhere, fires going everywhere, and then Cynthia, she's starting to use her powers for good now. She forms some clouds and she makes some rain on some fire on the exploding car. So after that, the car fire went out. She ended up basically saving entire forest from a forest fire. So that was her first real good deed with her power. And now it took 3 cars over to the hideout. So Joshua Stakeout was driving over to the hideout. Now all these people, they're driving. So now they had 3 cars. Now they only have 2. So as they reach the hideout, that's when they are finding what's really going on. So Hector, he ran across the field. He made sure everything was safe. They ran to the field. And then now we get to, before these scenes, we're getting to what's happening still in Joshua Lark's mind. He's still being attacked in his mind. So No Eyes is still playing these tricks, these mind games. And now Joshua Lark, and finally we get Rebecca, who turned on No Eyes, her father. She's finally defending herself. Now they've both formed a group, those two. Now they're fighting in what's called the simulation. It's the setup for the 3rd episode. So those two form the bond, and then as Rebecca and Joshua Lark are fighting No Eyes, they defeat him, but they realize it's just a simulation. So it's sort of why No Eyes is able to get in Joshua Lark's mind is through that simulation. That's where everything is sort of illusory. Everything can sort of be formed and not really be there, but still be there in a sense. That is where it starts in the mind. That's where the grid starts. That's the for the form of matrix is in the mind. So that's the introduction of that concept, and then you get into how they break free out of the simulation. You get some people, rescue them. Electro Boy, he uses his electricity powers. He blasts the simulation part, and then they end up sort of rescuing Joshua Lark, and then just Joshua Lark. Rebecca is, I believe, still in there. That's going to be important. And overall, you get to the part where they're fighting all the Sons of the Serpent. So Joshua Stakeout is fighting the Sons of the Serpent in the open, or inside the hideout building. And then they're just fighting back and forth until eventually Joshua Lark just takes over, takes out No Eyes, and in the end, they decided we have to rescue Rebecca because she wanted to protect Joshua Lark, wanted to save his life. So they try to go back inside the simulation, and this is what gets them trapped inside the simulation for the third book. So that's the setup there. Anyways, that's pretty much it for episode 2. Again, this is the paperback copy. Also have the ebook, $2.99, and then yeah, this is I believe the shortest copy is, I believe, I want to say potentially it might be 1025 or maybe around 950. So I try to make it 10 though, but yeah, this is again probably the shortest copy of the book. So, alright, everybody, peace.